Chapter 23, Part 2. Maybe we should set up a special event for him, the black-haired man suggested. If you care to make it worthwhile, what odds will you give on him? Odds? Red laughed derisively. The boy just got thrown. You want me to give odds? No, I think we'll go home. Then Red turned to Tom. Think you could ride that black if you had another chance, Tom? Wait a minute, the black-haired man said. You wanted to back him on any horse here. The black's had a go-around. He's tired. Tom's tired, too. He's ridden 2 go-rounds today. The announcer had come over to see what was happening. He turned and bellowed to the crowd, Don't hurry off, folks. We seem to have a special event in the making. Stick around. Red turned to Tom. Want to make another ride, Tom? Tom knew the answer he had to make. Anyway, he wanted to ride again. Prove himself. Yes, he said. Red turned to the men around him. You heard him. He'll ride. So let's make it worthwhile. Give me a chance to get back a little of my hard-earned money. Tell you what we'll do. Give me 2-to-1 odds, and the boy will try to ride any horse you pick. Not just the 10-second horn, but all the way. He'll ride him to the standstill. Maybe he won't rake with his spurs after the horn, but I say he'll ride him clean. Now what do you say? That, the black-haired man said, I want to see. A stakeholder was named. Red covered the first few bets, then he said, You boys just about cleaned me out, but I've still got a $100 saddle and a couple of good cutting horses. I can use another saddle, the black-haired man said, and handed the stakeholder money enough to cover the bet. 2 other men covered the horses. Red turned to Tom. Well, Tom, you either ride now or walk home. He took the bronc saddle from the gunny sack and handed Tom his chaps. The black-haired man and several other bettors went to the corral and picked out the horse. The announcer bellowed to the crowd. Well, folks, we've got it. Tom Blackbull, the boy who made 2 sensational rides before he was thrown in the finals, is going to ride again in a special event. He's going to ride with that big bay they're bringing to the chutes right now. And listen to this, folks. Tom is going to ride this horse to a standstill. No time limits. This ride will be a showdown to the finish. There was a roar of approval from the crowd. Red and Tom checked the saddle, cinches, latigo's stirrups, while the bay was put in the chute. They checked halter and rein. Then they saddled the bay. It hadn't been ridden that day, but Red had watched it in action the first go-around when it threw a rider in 6 seconds. He tries to buck right, he told Tom, in a tight circle. He'll duck from the first jump. Don't, for God's sakes, let him get any slack. Remember, the big black at home? This one bucks just like him. Same pattern. Tom put on the chaps, tightened his spurs, dried his hands. He straddled the chute, let himself down into the saddle. He adjusted the reins carefully, jamming his hat tight, set his spurs. All set? Red asked. Tom nodded. The gate swung open. The bay took 2 steps and went into the air as the crowd yelled. Tom raked with his spurs, and the horse came down, tried to jerk its head. Tom was braced for it. He rode with 2 twisting jumps, 2 stiff-legged, spine-jarring bucks. The horse was big and full of fight. It kept trying to get its head around to the right. Unable to, it made zigzag lunges, right, left, right again. It kicked and reared and spun. Tom rode with its rhythm, but at every pounding jump he felt as though his head was being driven right down between his shoulders. His left arm seemed about to be torn from its socket, but he rode, and he rode clean. The 10-second horn blew. The crowd was in an uproar, but Tom heard neither the horn nor crowd. He wasn't riding for time or for the crowd. He was riding for himself, and he wasn't riding the bay. He was riding a hurt and a hate deep inside. The blood drumming in his ears, his teeth ached with the pounding, but he held his rhythm. Then he began to gouge and punish with his spurs. Dull as the rowels were, they drew blood. He shifted his weight, brought it down with every jump, punishing the horse. He jerked viciously at the reins, giving an inch of slack, then snapping him back as though trying to break the horse's neck. The bay was grunting with every leap. It seemed to ease off for a moment, then bucked in another pattern of fury. It bellowed and came up in a appalling, dancing leap. Tom jerked off his hat and slapped it over the ears, and it came down with a jolt that jarred the earth. Its snorts became gasps of pain, and it slacked again. Tom gave it more rein, and it got its head around to the right and bucked in the tight circle Red had warned about. But Tom was still in the saddle, still gouging with his spurs. Then the rhythm slowed. The bay stumbled once, caught itself, bucked again. Now it began to come down, spraddle-legged, bracing itself. It staggered. He gave it all the rein it wanted, but it merely drooped its head. It began to cough. took a few steps and stood trembling. It tried to buck once more and failed. The crowd was clamoring. A pickup man was alongside, shouting to Tom, "Get clear, he's going down." And Tom felt the horse sagging under him. He saw the bloody foam for the first time, gobs of it welling from the horse's mouth. He grabbed the pickup man's shoulder, kicked free of the stirrups just as the horse fell from under him. Tom's feet struck the ground. He ran a few steps, then his knees buckled. He went down and looked around and saw the fallen horse thrash, its legs jerking convulsively. It lifted its head, and there was a gush of blood from its mouth. Then its head fell back with a thud. Tom turned away, half sick, and heard the crowd gasp. He got to his feet and walked to the chutes, not looking back. His head was light. He was sweating. He reached the chute, clung to the planks, and began to retch. Men crowded around him. Red was there, pushing at them, ordering, "Leave him alone. Give him air." The crowd eased back a little, and Red asked, "All right?" Tom, so weak he could barely stand, nodded and clung to the chute. A man brought the bronc saddle, tossed it on the ground, and someone asked, "What about the bay?" "Dead." The man stared at Tom in awe. "Dead as a doornail, ruptured its lungs or something." Tom began to recover. He stuffed the saddle into the gunny sack. Red had found the stakeholder, was stuffing handfuls of money into his pockets. He came back to Tom. "Come on," he ordered. "Let's get out of here." He pushed his way through the crowd, around the chutes, and started toward the corrals and their own saddle horses. The crowd of men at the chutes followed them as far as the place where the dead horse lay. Tom glanced at it and turned away. Most of the crowd stayed to look, but the black-haired ranchman followed and caught up with them near the corrals. "Just a minute, Dillon," he said, and Red stopped and faced him. "That was a setup, Dillon." The man was flushed with anger. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean. You picked the horse, and the boy rode him, didn't he?" "Yes, he rode him, and we paid off, but he could have ridden the black in the final go-around, too. Only he had orders not to. Didn't you, son?" "Leave him alone," Red snapped. "He made his ride. Go get the horses, Tom." The man turned to Tom. "You had your orders to throw the final go-around, didn't you?" Red stepped between them and cocked his fist. "I said leave him alone." The man stepped back. "All right, Dillon, you took us, but don't ever try it again. Don't you ever show up at another rodeo in Aztec, understand?" "Aztec?" Red laughed derisively. "Why, you two-bit tin horn. We're going where there's real money." He backed away. "Come on, Tom." And they went to the corral, saddled their horses, and headed for home.